Good morning, y'all. I want to jump into this one carefully because the headline on this story is real, it is confirmed, and it comes from a peer-reviewed study. But I also want to make sure y'all understand exactly what breaking apart and getting worse actually mean in a geological context, because those words carry a very different weight to a scientist studying processes that unfold over millions of years than they do in a headline designed to grab your attention on a Tuesday morning. So let me walk you all through exactly what researchers found off the coast of Vancouver Island, why it took decades to actually observe, what it means for the Cascadia subduction zone that runs right along the Pacific Northwest coast of the United States, and what the honest, responsible rate on the earthquake risk implications actually is. Let's start with where this is happening, because the location matters enormously for why American audiences specifically should care. Off the coast of Vancouver Island, in the northern reaches of the Cascadia subduction zone, researchers have captured the clearest images ever recorded of a subduction zone in the actual process of breaking apart. I want to explain what a subduction zone is for anybody who has not heard me cover this before, because it is the foundational concept underneath this entire story. A subduction zone is a boundary where one tectonic plate, usually a denser slab of oceanic crust, dives beneath a neighboring, typically lighter continental plate, sinking down into the mantle below. These zones are responsible for some of the most powerful and dangerous geological events on the entire planet, including the largest earthquakes ever recorded and many of the world's most explosive volcanic eruptions. The Cascadia subduction zone specifically stretches roughly 700 miles along the coast from Northern California up through Oregon, Washington, and into British Columbia, marking the boundary where the Juan de Fuca plate, along with the smaller neighboring Explorer plate, slides beneath the North American plate. This is not some obscure, far-off geological curiosity. This is the exact fault system responsible for the last truly massive earthquake to strike the U.S. West Coast, a magnitude 9 event back in the year 1700, and it remains one of the most closely studied and most seriously respected seismic hazards anywhere in North America. Now, let's get into what the research team actually found. A group led by geologist Brandon Shuck at Louisiana State University, using data collected during the 2021 Cascadia Seismic Imaging Experiment aboard the research vessel Marcus G. Langseth, operated by Columbia University's Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory, used a technique that is essentially an ultrasound for the Earth. The ship sent powerful sound waves down into the seafloor, and those waves bounced back off the different layers of rock beneath, allowing researchers to build an extraordinarily detailed picture of the structure of the plate as it descends beneath North America. What that imaging revealed, published in the journal Science Advances, is that instead of subducting as one smooth, continuous slab, the way a textbook diagram might suggest, the Juan de Fuca plate is tearing apart in pieces as it sinks, breaking along a specific structure called the Nootka Fault Zone, which is slicing the incoming plate into separate segments even as nearby portions continue subducting normally. One of these tears is genuinely dramatic in scale. Along one specific fault, researchers found that a slab of ocean floor has dropped by roughly 5 kilometers, about 3 miles, relative to the surrounding crust, and the research team describes this fault as close to breaking clean through entirely. I want to explain why researchers are describing this as such a significant discovery, because it is not simply that a subduction zone can break apart. Geologists have actually suspected that for decades based on indirect evidence. What is genuinely new here is catching this exact process happening in real time, with this level of clarity. As one of the researchers involved in analyzing this data, Suzanne Carbot, explained, geologists have understood for years that subduction can stall out when a particularly buoyant section of oceanic plate reaches the boundary and resists sinking the way the rest of the slab does, but actually observing the breakup itself in progress, with this kind of resolution, is something that simply has not been possible before now. The team has described the process almost like watching a train slowly derailing car by car, rather than a single sudden crash. The plate is not snapping cleanly in one place all at once, but rather fragmenting piece by piece over an extended structural zone, forming what researchers call microplates, smaller broken-off fragments of the original larger plate, rather than one single new boundary. This discovery also solves a puzzle that geologists have been chasing for a long time, which is understanding exactly how subduction zones eventually die out. Subduction zones can persist and remain active for tens of millions of years, but they do eventually shut down, and till now, researchers did not have a clear, direct example of that shutdown process actually caught in the act to study. This new imaging off Vancouver Island provides exactly that missing piece, and it is already helping explain geological mysteries found elsewhere around the world. Off the coast of Baja California, for example, researchers have long identified what are called fossil microplates, scattered remnant fragments of a much larger ancient tectonic plate called the Farallon Plate, which used to subduct beneath North America before eventually disappearing entirely. For decades, those fragments were understood as evidence that a subduction zone had died out at some point in the geological past. But without a live example to study, the actual mechanism producing those fragments remained genuinely unclear. This new research off Vancouver Island gives scientists exactly that live example, showing in real time the piecewise, fragmenting pattern that likely produced those ancient Farallon Plate remnants millions of years ago. Now let's get to the part of this story that I think deserves the most careful, honest treatment, because this is exactly where a headline can either inform people well or genuinely mislead them, and I do not want to be part of the second category. What does this discovery actually mean for earthquake risk along the Pacific Northwest coast right now? The research team behind this study has been explicit and direct on this point, stating clearly that these findings do not significantly change the hazard outlook for Cascadia. I want to repeat that, because it is the single most important sentence in this entire story for anybody living along that coastline. This is not new evidence that a major earthquake is more imminent than scientists previously believed. What this research does provide is a dramatically improved understanding of the underlying structure of the plate that is subducting beneath the Pacific Northwest. And researchers say that improved structural understanding can help refine future scenario modeling, essentially helping seismologists better understand how a break or a fragment within the descending slab might influence where future ruptures concentrate, or how they might unfold without changing the fundamental probability estimate for when the next major Cascadia earthquake is likely to occur. And that existing probability estimate, independent of this new plate-tearing research, remains genuinely serious in its own right, which is exactly why I do not want anybody watching this video to walk away thinking the underlying risk itself is somehow overstated just because this specific new finding does not change it. Canada's Geological Survey points to solid geologic evidence, preserved in coastal sediment layers up and down the Pacific Northwest coastline, showing that massive subduction earthquakes along this exact fault system have struck with a recurrence interval commonly estimated at somewhere between 300 and 800 years. The last such event, the magnitude 9 earthquake I mentioned earlier, struck in the year 1700, which means the region has now gone more than 3 centuries without a repeat of that scale of event, placing us solidly within, and in some estimates approaching the latter portion of, that historical recurrence window. That risk existed before this new plate-tearing study came out, and it continues to exist regardless of it. This new research is not the reason to be concerned about a major Cascadia earthquake. It is simply a fascinating, genuinely important scientific advance in understanding the structure of the plate involved in producing that already well-established hazard. I want to spend a moment on the getting worse piece of this story too, because I think that phrase deserves its own honest examination. If getting worse is meant to suggest that the earthquake danger along the Pacific Northwest coast has measurably increased because of this new discovery, that is not an accurate characterization of what the research shows, and the study's own authors have said so directly. But if getting worse is understood instead as describing the tectonic plate's own ongoing structural fragmentation, the literal physical process of the slab continuing to tear and separate into smaller pieces as it sinks deeper into the mantle over time, then that framing is technically consistent with what a subduction zone in the process of dying out actually does. It continues fragmenting further as the process progresses. The critical distinction I want y'all to hold on to is the time scale involved. This is not a process unfolding over months, years, or even human lifetimes. Multiple outlets covering this exact research have made a point of stressing this directly, explicitly noting that despite attention-grabbing headlines, the process of a tectonic plate breaking apart is extremely slow, unfolding on geological timescales that extend far beyond anything a human being could observe, changing meaningfully within their own lifetime. That distinction is exactly what separates scientific reality from exaggerated interpretation on a story like this one. I also want to spend a little more time on the imaging technique itself, because I think it deserves real credit as a genuine leap forward in how researchers can study something happening thousands of feet beneath the ocean's surface without ever physically touching it. The method the Louisiana State University team used is formally called seismic reflection imaging, and the ultrasound comparison researchers have used to describe it publicly is a genuinely accurate way to think about how it works. Just as a medical ultrasound sends sound waves into the human body and interprets the echoes bouncing back off different tissue boundaries to build a picture of internal structure, this survey sent powerful controlled sound pulses down through miles of ocean water and into the seafloor itself, then recorded how those waves reflected back off the boundaries between different rock layers deep underground. By carefully processing an enormous volume of that reflected data collected across the entire 2021 survey, researchers were able to construct a detailed cross-sectional image of the Juan de Fuca plate's internal structure as it descends, revealing the tears and fragmentation patterns that simply were not visible using older, lower-resolution imaging methods from previous decades. This is part of a broader trend across Earth science right now, where advances in imaging technology, whether that is this kind of seismic reflection survey or the satellite correlation techniques used to study earthquakes like the one in Myanmar, are letting researchers observe processes with a level of clarity that was simply out of reach even 10 or 15 years ago. I also want to touch briefly on some of the secondary non-earthquake implications this kind of plate tearing can have, because the research team has noted that these structural breaks in a subducting plate can influence more than just where future earthquakes might concentrate. Tears and fractures within a subducting slab can also affect the pathways along which warm fluids and dissolved gases, including methane, migrate upward and eventually seep out of the seafloor. And those methane seeps can, in turn, support small, localized pockets of unusual deep-sea marine life that cluster around these seep sites, forming unique little ecosystems that researchers are still working to fully catalog and understand. This connects the plate tearing story to broader ongoing marine science research along this same stretch of coastline, where oceanographers have separately been mapping seafloor seep sites and the specialized organisms that depend on them, giving this geological discovery relevance that extends beyond earthquake hazard alone and into how scientists understand deep ocean ecosystems in this region. So let me bring this together and explain what I think the real responsible takeaway from this research actually is. Scientists have, for the first time, captured direct, high-resolution evidence of a subduction zone breaking apart in real time off the coast of Vancouver Island, along the northern end of the Cascadia subduction zone that runs down the Pacific Northwest coast of the United States. That discovery is genuinely significant, solving a long-standing scientific question about how these massive geological systems eventually shut down, and providing researchers with new structural detail that can help refine future earthquake scenario modeling for this specific fault system. What this discovery does not do is establish that a major Cascadia earthquake has become more likely, more imminent, or more dangerous than it was understood to be before this study came out. The genuine, serious hazard along this coastline, the possibility of a magnitude 8 or 9 subduction zone earthquake, along with the tsunami such an event would generate, has existed and been taken seriously by researchers and emergency planners for decades, entirely independent of this new plate-tearing research, and it continues to be the primary reason coastal communities across Northern California, Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia maintain active earthquake and tsunami preparedness programs. If you live anywhere along that Pacific Northwest coastline, the message I want y'all taking from this video is not a new elevated alarm based on this specific study. It is a reminder that the well-established, long-standing Cascadia hazard deserves the same ongoing seriousness it always has. Know your tsunami evacuation route if you live, work, or vacation anywhere along the immediate coastline, since a major Cascadia earthquake could generate a tsunami reaching the shore within minutes rather than hours, leaving very little time to react once shaking starts. Keep an emergency kit stocked and current in your home and vehicle. Secure heavy furniture and water heaters against tipping during strong shaking. And understand that the region's building codes and infrastructure investments in recent decades have been made specifically with this exact hazard in mind, which is exactly the kind of ongoing science-informed preparedness that research like this new Vancouver Island study ultimately supports and refines, rather than something that should generate a fresh wave of panic on its own. If you found this breakdown helpful, please subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, because I want to keep bringing you all the real science behind headlines like this one, with the honest context that so often gets stripped away in the rush to grab attention. Share this video with anybody you know living along the Pacific Northwest coast, because understanding both the genuine scientific significance of this discovery and its actual limited implications for near-term earthquake risk is exactly the kind of information that helps people stay appropriately prepared without falling into unnecessary panic over a headline. I will keep watching for updates as more research comes out of the Cascadia subduction zone, and I will bring you all the next piece of this story the moment there is something new to report. Stay informed, stay prepared, and I love y'all.